The truth of the matter is that, you can only be a catalyst, right? And the conditions have to be right. The open network principle says that it's okay if the intermediary is a buyer's agent or a seller's agent. The moment it becomes an agent of both, it is very hard to regulate it. Remember, the people who are unserved in India are people who don't have long-term predictability. Today, there is no premium on being just good enough in anything that you do. You have to find your own area where you can be great at what you do.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the KVKurious Podcast. Our guest for today is Sharad Sharma, who is the co-founder of iSPIRT. Previously, Sharad was the CEO of Yahoo India R&D, and for the last 1.5 to 2 decades, Sharad is actively devoted to making India a product nation. In this conversation, Sharad shares his experience building products and digital infrastructure. What goes into building scalable solutions to onboard Indians from Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities to participate in the market economy, and much more. This conversation is a very critical analysis of what business model works, what kind of tech solutions is needed for India, what kind of models is needed for India, and how this has to be significantly different from what we've been copying from the West. And what should entrepreneurs look for and consider when you're building for the Indian economy and the Indian market. I'm sure you'll find this conversation super insightful. Thank you for staying with me. Listen to Sharad Sharma on the KVKurious Podcast. Hi, Sharad sir. Of course, you need no introduction. The world knows you as the man.
Back off. Before, we'll redo this. No Sharad sir. Nobody calls me sir. Yeah, I am Sharad forever.
Okay, so the thing is, anyone above 45, I tend to automatically address as sir, right? Because I get uncomfortable if I don't use the sir.
I must tell you a story.
Yeah,
I can relate to that. When I started working, which was way back in 86, I finished my engineering in 86. I ended up working for a boss. Everybody, I was in a software R&D setup. Everybody was on first name terms. But my boss, his name is S.R. Katpalia, had premature gray hair, right? And I had come up in this culture where anybody who had gray hair, you couldn't call him by his first name. I remember how much ragging I got in the first few days because I couldn't get myself to call him in that way. So I can relate to what you're saying, but things have changed since 86 and now. So
okay. Let me try and get used to calling you Sharad. Anyway, Sharad, so of course you need no introduction as the founder of iSPIRT, and this conversation is going to be a free-flowing one where we try and learn your perspectives, your ideas around what the future of digital public infra in India can be. What are some things that youth like us can do to participate in this revolution, and much more, right? But then maybe I'd like to start off with a very personal question here. So when I study your profile, one thing that really stands out to me as someone who's been an SVP or the CEO of India R&D at Yahoo, and this is in the early days when Indian entrepreneurial or VC ecosystem was just springing up, right? It was just budding. Why did you make a choice of diving into, let's say, digital public goods or nonprofit ventures as opposed to just building your own startup or venturing into the VC ecosystem? Like, what was your thought process that allowed you to make this choice?
Yeah, so, the pivotal year for me was 2009. I'm 1964 born. I turned 45 at that time. And for the previous few years, I'd been wrestling with this issue. So in 2004, I was in the US and I had left Lucent Bell Labs to start a company called Teltia Technologies, which had become part of Cisco, right? So, and it was a telecom infrastructure startup, which had we had three of us had gotten together to create it, and this was in February of 2001. And if you go back at that time, and many of your listeners may probably not have been born then, but there was blood on the floor because the dot-com collapse had happened. And part of the impact of the dot-com collapse was on internet, but the real impact was on telecom infrastructure because the telecom infrastructure had been overbuilt and, it just didn't make sense to do a telecom infrastructure startup. But we had done it. We raised $6 million as seed capital. We built it out, eventually had a, reasonably, I would say a modest exit. And, but at that time, what happened is, what the VCs do is, if you've had even a little bit of success, they pump you up. And I genuinely, in 2004, I thought I was God's gift to entrepreneurship. So if you met me at that time, I would have been on this path of wanting to be another entrepreneur and so on and so forth. And my daughter was 6.5, and this idea took root that if I do a startup, it's going to be a 5-year commitment, and I'm somewhat kind of unidimensional, and I lose sight of everything. And and before you know it, she'll be 11. And that will be too late to expose her to Indian culture. So if you have to expose her to Indian culture, it is time to do now, right? And so the idea was to come to India for a year, as essentially as a sabbatical, and take a year off, and basically, let her meet with extended family, and somewhat imbibe the India, or expose her to Indian culture. And so that was the role. But to long story short, I ended up staying on because, before I was coming, I got roped in by Veritas to say, hey, become part of Veritas. And Veritas got acquired by Symantec. So I had a golden handshake for that reason. And then I did a PE firm, believe it or not, with Gary Bloom involved in that, and others. And that didn't work out. And then Jerry Yang was becoming the CEO of Yahoo, and I became part of Yahoo, right? And I was actually, my role was, I was responsible for emerging markets with Keith Nielsen. But my identity was that of an R&D guy, because I'd been in R&D all my life. So I, have preferred to keep my R&D identity in Yahoo rather than my the business kind of a responsibility that I had in addition to my R&D responsibility. So while all this was going on, what was churning in my mind was that what is it that I want to do next, right? And I saw all of these things as learning experiences, but leading up to something, right? And and it wasn't clear what that was going to be. And I think that clarity started emerging a little bit from being an angel investor in India. So in 2005 onwards, I started investing. In fact, I started investing in 2004. And what happened by end of 2005, anything and everything that I had touched turned to dust, right? And at that moment, I was a little disoriented by this, right? Because I have this self-image. I knew what entrepreneurship was about. And I thought, I knew what angel investing was about. So in late 2006, I told myself that I must accept I don't know anything about this, because, look at my track record for the last 2 years, and I will restart this whole process, I told myself, but this time with a beginner's mind, right? So I basically convinced myself that I didn't know anything about angel investing, and I'm going to be a student of angel investing. And from that point onwards. And so that was very helpful. In fact, my best investment came after that, which is Dhruva. It's a Pune-based company.
Yeah.
I was one of the lead investors, Rajan Anandam and many others, Rehan, and many of us were involved. And subsequently, they raised money from Sequoia. And of course, if everything goes right, they'll do a kind of a public IPO next year. So in the US. So a series of companies came. So I had two types of investments then. One were these purely tech companies, because that was the world I came from. I understood that. And the second was actually companies focused on what we would now call as Bharat. In fact, one of them was Bharat Matrimony, right? Where, in fact, even Yahoo made an investment. And I was on the board of that company in those early days. And I must commend Murugu, the CEO. He is the one who opened my eyes to this idea that building in Bharat is very, very difficult, right? Because there are simple things that cannot be done so easily. And this is not a problem that can be solved at the company level. It needs to be solved,
Right.
as a group of companies as we go forward. And I think his clarity of thinking about the potential of the Bharat market and how our ability to develop the Bharat market is going to be important for India's success in the future, is something that kind of took root in my head. And so come, 2007 and 8, I started focusing more on then building out this software product ecosystem. I became the vice chair of NASSCOM Product Forum. There used to be a company that was doing well at that time, Subex, and Subhash Menon was the chair. And in 2009, he was kind enough. He said, "Look, it's probably better you be the chair." So I stepped in and became the chair. And then I realized that there was this ecosystem building that we could do, and I thought maybe I'm not very rich, but I have enough money to live my lifestyle without any problem, and so on and so forth. And I thought, rather than chasing money, what if we try and make India a product nation? So that's really the genesis of this. And but left to myself, if I knew how difficult this is going to be, I may not have taken this on.
Very interesting. Very interesting. But now when you look back, maybe 10, almost a decade later,
yes.
What do you think about the decision? Barring the fact that it must have been super difficult and challenging.
Yes. No, I feel I don't have any regrets in having picked this up for a variety of reasons. One is that it's been a journey of learning, right? And so I think that's been there. I love also what Phanindra Sama of Redbus. I think we don't appreciate him enough for having introduced a concept of entrepreneurship, which is very Indian in nature. And, I'll just do a little bit of aside on that. And because that is something I fully buy into and I made it part of my thinking. And, but the credit goes to Funny. See, the Western idea of entrepreneurship came from this idea of going West, right? And conquering new territory, right? Because that's the American model that was there. That was the gold rush of the early years. Now, that concept of entrepreneurship means nothing here in India. There's no context for that, right? I mean, you can, of course, intellectually relate to it, but that's not part of our culture. What Funny came up with, he said, look, entrepreneurship is really about courting adversity, right? Supposing your startup is growing by 30-40% a year, what do you say? Hey, can I grow 60% a year, right? I mean, you're as a founder, as an entrepreneur, you are almost inviting adversity all the time, right? Even when things are going well. And many of the times things are in any case not going well, right? So it's about dealing with adversity all the time. And adversity has the potential to either be a curse or be a gift. It all depends on how you look at it, right? If you look at it from the point of view of the fact that it can make me stronger, then it will actually leave you stronger, right? And so adversity can be a way to find your own limiting beliefs, all kind of junk that you have inside, and get rid of it and be a better version of yourself, right? And so what Funny introduced, I think, in the ecosystem is that entrepreneurship is that journey. That journey, in fact, he says so evocatively that, instead of doing a Hajj or instead of doing Char Dham, be an entrepreneur, right? Because that can actually it may help you be the better version of yourself. And I think that's entirely true. So what this journey became is it's a difficult journey, undoubtedly so. And perhaps at some times it looks even like an impossible journey. But it has left behind, not just in me, but in many other people who are involved in this movement, it has left behind better versions of the individuals involved, right? And as I look back, I think I kind of, connected with this. And now I understand the formal linkage, but I think it was an informal linkage. Why? Because I saw an element of this in my mother's side of the family, which came from what is Pakistan, right? And in that part of the family, everybody was very actively involved in the freedom movement, right? And so my grandfather, his younger brother, they were all in jail for long periods of time, and this, that, and the other. So I had imbibed this idea of a difficult thing making you stronger. They never saw themselves as victims of all this
Yeah, yeah,
difficulty that went through. You see, as Nelson Mandela, I think he spent whatever, maybe
yeah.
27 years. He didn't come out as a victim. He came out as a better version of himself, right? And so I think this idea really appeals to me as an individual. And so therefore, this became a way for finding, in a way, meaning in what I'm doing. I and of course, a volunteer model, you end up doing what you like, so that's also there. And and then it lets you have this inner work that you need. So it's been very fulfilling in all those ways.
Very interesting. And since you brought up the volunteering model, right, I want to double click on that. How did you go about finding the first set of volunteers or discovering the first problem statement that you wanted to work on?
See, there several people were involved, and I would say, in some ways, I think Sanjay Jain has an important role to play. Sometimes you see these videos with, one person stands up to dance, and then slowly, everybody is dancing, right?
Yeah, it's a Mexican wave.
Yeah. So this is that Sanjay Jain was that first way. Here was this person, very, very smart guy, working in Google at that time on MapMaker with Lalitesh Katragada, right? He and Lalitesh were together doing the MapMaker. And Lalitesh, of course, is a very accomplished person on his own. Google's first company that they acquired was Lalitesh's startup, right? And Lalitesh had established the Google R&D in India. He had hired Sanjay, and now both of them were working together on this MapMaker. And MapMaker was an integral part of Google Maps' success, across the world. So here was a person who was in a hot product, in a hot company. Google was very hot back in 2009. But when Aadhaar came about, right, I was actually in Yahoo at that time, and I'm trying to hire him into Yahoo. And we are having these conversations, and I see in him this desire to instead do something different. And that different ended up being Aadhaar. He was a volunteer chief product officer of Aadhaar. And subsequently, as MOSIP has come up, which is now 10 countries, 88 million people using it, hopefully we'll get to 500 million very soon. He's been instrumental in bringing that to life. Very quiet, doesn't attract attention to himself, but a deep thinker of a kind that, we don't get very often in the ecosystem. So I think, he, in a way, precipitated this, right? So many of us were thinking about it. You need somebody to have the gumption, the guts to do something. And then that kind of sets in motion a kind of a contagion.
Yeah.
And that is how. And why that contagion happened is because, by then, if you go back to that time, 2008, 2009, many of these MNC R&D centers had been in operation for 15 years or more, right?
Okay.
So if you remember back in time, and this is going back in history, 85 is when the TI R&D was established in India, and they had a strong tech team. It was doing very well. And subsequently, many people came. I myself, this is my second stint in Bangalore. I came to Bangalore as a AT&T, employee in 93 to 97 to establish then the AT&T R&D here. So what is now, at that time, network systems became Lucent. So what you have as a Lucent R&D came up at that time. We set up the business communication systems in Pune, which became Avaya. What you still have on Cunningham Road, NCR, that came up at that time. So I had been part of this R&D in India, MNC R&D ecosystem in India. And I knew, as a card-carrying member, almost all the senior people who were there in that system by 15 years later, because they had grown, in their parent organizations. And all of them, almost all of them had this angst that we were doing this really important, compelling work for our parent company, but we are not doing anything for India. Right? And so this angst was there. In that angst, this idea in 2007, 8, 9 of building a product nation, right? this idea of Sanjay having the gumption to leave Google to be a volunteer product officer, you can almost see, a forest fire being created at that time. And so that was the context within which this whole kind of movement, in some sense, started taking root. Does that make sense at all? Right?
It makes a lot of sense. So you're telling that all of this happened as a, maybe I wouldn't say series of accidents, but just a lot of ambient factors coming into picture, and not necessarily something that you actively wanted to do. It was external factors.
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy to rewrite history and give agency to yourself for having thought all this about. But the truth of the matter is that, you can only be a catalyst, right? And the conditions have to be right? And any movement like this one, which has taken root and is growing, often involves many people. And in fact, some of the people who choose to be silent and are not visible are the most important people in this, right? And so their contributions matter more than the people that you see. So it's been truly a joyful journey for that reason, because it's collaborative in nature. And very early on, we decided that we would also call ourselves no greed, no glory volunteers, right? So if we do something, we'll not take the credit ourselves, we'll give it to the policymaker. And so therefore no glory. And if we do something and that has market value, we will not extract anything from it. So we won't go back, let's say, to PhonePe and say, hey, why are you not a donor in iSPIRT? So we'll never do that, right? So the idea is that we will, by keeping it free like this, what it does is it makes it easier to co-opt other people. I mean, there is a benefit of doing that, because over time, the policymakers learn that these guys are, true to their word. And so therefore, if we kind of take their ideas, there is an upside of doing that. And the same is on the market side. So it kind of expands your influence and you can do more. And by being truly no greed and no glory, India is one of those cultures where you generate more respect, right? And so we have a long history of people being respected because they were willing to walk away from those two things. Now, so that's
I think now it pays off a lot more, because for someone who's a volunteer at iSPIRT, it's one of the most glorious things they can have on their resume as a candidate, as someone who is a deep thinker, as someone who is proficient in building products. And I think it may not have been so easy to build that level of credibility if you happen to be one of the for-profit initiatives.
Right, absolutely. And now, of course, the responsibility is to keep it that way, right? Because it's very easy. The only way to keep it that way for a group of people to practice this no greed, no glory is a social compact, right? So there's no legal way of being frankly able to do this. It has to be done through culture, right? It has to be done social compact. So if somebody is a volunteer and he or she has to feel that I let down, my fellow volunteers, right? If I break this norm, right? I mean, and this model works only up till a point, right? And that's called the Dunbar's limit. So if you, and that's supposed to be about 150 or so, nobody knows what it is exactly for sure, and that's a function of our cognitive ability, because as the network grows, your number of linkages that you have, grow, non-linearly, and therefore your brain's capacity to keep track of who is where and doing what, and that map that you create for yourself is computationally limited and supposed to be 150 people. So we decided that iSPIRT will only be roughly that. Sometimes we are higher. We are 186 volunteers today, but roughly our goal is to be 150, right? So then that allowed us to also say that there are, of course, handful of things we can do, but there's so many other things that have to be done, right? India perhaps needs 30 iSPIRTs of this size. And then our role is to help everybody else in whichever way they can. Because the success in India will happen by giving away whatever we know, right? Even about, bringing about this kind of playground building that we do, or even running a volunteer model. So that has also been an effort that allows us to get context, learn from a broader set of people, and be more effective as we go forward.
Very interesting that you would mention the limit, because actually before we started the conversation, I just did a small Q&A with my audience, and so, regarding what question should I ask you, and one of the questions that came up was, why does iSPIRT have a very limited volunteer base? Why do you not democratize it? How can more people from different parts of the country just actively participate? Because at the end of the day, it's volunteering and they're not expecting much. Then why do you have such a hard entry line? These are the questions that I got very repeatedly. And it's interesting that now you would mention this limit, and now it makes much more sense.
Yeah, so if you go to volunteers.ispirit.in, where there are all these open house videos for potential volunteers, this is something that we bring out often. And our hope is that, of course, you can be a volunteer, but, we are a movement. We are not an organization, right? And India needs this movement at scale. And there are many places that you can actually apply the same concepts. And so it'll be great to volunteer with iSPIRT, but iSPIRT is doing only a handful of things. And if it's beyond that, there are many other places that you can also go out and volunteer. So that's the thought process. Now, of course, back in time, we had this criticism, and a very legitimate one, because we would have volunteers only by reference, right? So what happened was there was a somewhat of an incestuous kind of relationships that were there because, you needed to know something inside. And then a few years ago, we started this volunteers.ispirit.in and started doing this open house sessions. And now I would say probably about 55 or something in that range of our volunteers that come in are through this completely open process. And that's been helpful because that's limited therefore, as you would imagine, the concentration of volunteers from Bangalore has come down, right?
Okay.
In fact, we have lots of excellent volunteers in Mumbai, in Pune and Chennai, Delhi, all of these, because earlier, this incestuousness, of course, had a geography preference, and that has happened. Second, we have a lot more younger, under 30 volunteers that we thought, will be a limited number, but 30% of our volunteer base is now under 30. So there has been enormous benefit that we've opened up, but we needed to do it slowly so that we preserve the volunteer ethos that we have, which we will need to preserve for the next 20 years at least, because the work will not get finished.
Yeah, definitely. That's understandable.
Yeah.
So whenever iSPIRT comes up with one new open house challenge or one of the problems that you take on, how do you effectively decide that this is something worth dedicating our efforts to, and this should be one of the things in our pipeline?
So we have two filters that we have to go through. Our first filter is that, so these are 2x2 matrices, and I'm going to describe both of them to you. And the first one, and later maybe I can send you the slides if you like to insert them, you can do that. And the first one is that, see, our central belief is that iSPIRT's role is to supplement both state capacity and market capacity. Right? So we want to take on problems where both are needed. So let me explain. So our view is that if you were to lay all the states down, then there are some states with very high state capacity. Singapore, for example, if they decide to do something, they can summon up the expertise that they need to be able to make that happen. India has middling state capacity, right? And there are many other countries which have not even that, right? They're very low state capacity. Similarly, if you look at market capacity, India has middling market capacity. Although many of our entrepreneurs believe that is not true, our market capacity is very high, but actually that's not true. Our business culture is not R&D oriented. It's very arbitrage oriented, right? We don't have access to capital that, for example, we can build an app like WhatsApp, Tumblr, etc., where they said we're going to build apps where we're not going to worry about monetization. We just want to make sure we deliver value to the consumer, and rest of it will sort itself out. That's a mark of market capacity, market's ability to do something like that, right? Similarly, your ability to take long gestation projects which will take 8-10 years to fructify, and therefore have an R&D mindset to be able to do that. is market capacity. So we have middling market capacity, right? We don't have very high market capacity. So if we are trying to do something which is competitive in the world, right? Somebody has to come and address those gaps, right? So we want to pick an area where we can address those gaps, right? And the beauty of the volunteer model is that you find people sometimes across the world, who are willing to help address those gaps. So how do we do that? We do state capacity by either giving policy recommendations, right? Or by actually building the public tech that is needed in the ecosystem, right? And giving it away. How do we supplement market capacity? We supplement it by doing these playbooks where we figure out the playbooks and give them away, and by creating what we call as market catalysts. Now, market catalysts are many types. Sometimes, working with VCs so that we motivate them to invest in that sector. Sometimes creating a market collective like Sahamati, right? So that whole area is able to function more effectively as it goes forward. So for us, the Sahamati is a market catalyst, right, for the AA account aggregator system as we go forward. So our goal is really to build a playground, and in that playground to be able to supplement these two things. So now if you find something that we don't have this to supplement, so take, for example, primary education. In our view, primary education has to be state provided, right, for it to be effective. So therefore, this is one of those areas where market doesn't have a role to play. So it won't have both market and state coming together, right?
Yeah.
Right. So it doesn't appeal to us. The second filter is that if it passes this test, then we ask ourselves two questions. We say, will the government be willing to set up a SPV, a special purpose vehicle? Because if they're not willing to set up a SPV and it has to be implemented inside the ministry itself, chances of anything happening are much lower. So what is an SPV? SPV is UIDAI for Aadhaar, is NPC for NPCI for UPI, or NHA for health, right? ONDC as an org for the ONDC effort, and so on and so forth. So if you don't create these SPVs and ministry has to do it, it will not work, right? Second is we make a careful assessment of how powerful are the incumbents. And why I'm smiling is because about a little while ago, before all this farm bill came, we had a choice whether to focus on agriculture. There's a lot of pressure. And we walked away because we said the incumbents in agriculture are way too strong to allow for a change to happen. Right. And so we said, doesn't meet our test. But we said aquaculture, animal husbandry doesn't have these, powerful incumbents. So one of these iSPIRT efforts that we've had is called livestock stack, not built by iSPIRT, built by a group of people outside of iSPIRT with help from iSPIRT. But that has worked, or that is working. Why? Because, that field is more ripe for change, right? So health, in many cases, things don't happen because the incumbents in health, let's say in the US, are so powerful that they won't let any change happen. But we took on health because we feel that the forces that favor status quo
I want to understand this better.
Are not powerful enough to be able to block change.
What do you mean by incumbents are so strong that they'll not let change happen? But maybe I'm asking a very naive question here. But isn't technology or disruption all supposed to be about, can you just move the biggest, strongest forces in the market to create this new offering, which is supposedly better for the market?
You should be able to do that. But the reason, there are many other things have to come together to be able to do that, right? So the reason UPI was able to take on Visa, MasterCard was that Visa, MasterCard were only serving 25 million people with their credit card after being in India for 30 years, right? And this wasn't because anybody was holding them back. This was because, their model, when they give somebody a credit card, they're giving them a 1-year credit limit. 1-year credit limit means that I should be able to look at your salary history for the last 2-3 years and see that it's been stable. If it's been stable, I will happily make a bet for 1 more year. Now, there are limited number in a country where, formal employment is limited. There are limited number of people like that, right? So they were running at the limits of what their model allows them to do. Furthermore, they had to send plastic card with one kind of a, and then the pin with another. And there were costs that were associated with it, which didn't make sense, if you're only going to be a marginal user of the credit card. So the question was that left a large white space that was never going to be tackled, right? And so the question really was, we're going to serve that unserved market. You are welcome to do that as well. But, how can you stop us in serving that unserved market? So similarly, right, if you look at what we are trying to do in credit, we're not focusing on, the 11-12% of the MSMEs that already have credit. We are very happy for them. Please, we want to focus on those 88% of the MSMEs that don't have credit. And why don't they have credit? Because the credit product that they could avail of is a working capital limit. That is again a 1-year product, and the same thing applies there again. How many MSMEs do you have which have a business trend line like this? If you have a business trend line like this, then somebody will be happy to give you a 1-year credit limit. But with a handful of MSMEs, these are those 10%, 12% that are there. What about the remaining where their business is like this, and especially in this economy that we are talking about for the last few years with COVID and all of that, right? And so if it's like this, then you can't give them a 1-year tenor loan.
Right.
You can only give them a 1 month, 2 month tenor loan. How do you make a 1 month, 2 month tenor loan happen so that it's rotatable? Now, that's a new class of a product for an underserved part of the market, right? So there you can go back and say that, look, this is, we can deal with the competition, or we can deal with forces who will try to stop us there. Same with commerce, right? I mean, the question is, there are some number of people who are buyers, right? So how do you make biryani buyers out of people who have not been biryani buyers before?
Right.
Right.
So it's more of category creation.
It is actually we call it playground creation, right? Yeah. So all of these areas, right, you got to find the white space to go after.
Right.
See, because if you're going to go and poke Visa and MasterCard in the eye, they'll fight back, right? Similarly, in health, our focus is not, again, on, you remember, we do break up India into 3 Indias. We call it India 1, India 2, and India 3. So India is about 300 million families. And the most, by family income, India 1 are the richest 100 million families, and so on and so forth. So very early on, our belief has been that, look, the current system, the Western templates, at best serve India 1, perhaps only India 1A of 30 million families. But let's say you play around with it and you can make it work for India 1. But those Western templates don't work for India 2, don't work for India 3. Right. So right from the beginning, our model has been that we got to find the Indian template for serving India 2 and do it in a way that the government can do a better job of serving India 3. Because India 3 even doesn't have the ability to participate in a market economy. Right. And so therefore, they need to be served by the government in a much more effective way. So the purpose of India Stack is India 2 and India 3. India Stack has dual objectives. One objective is, how does it take entrepreneurs and make their life simpler so that they can go and serve those 100 million families in India 2? And at the same time, the same building blocks, how do they make government's life simpler so that they can go and serve the 100 million families in India 3? Right? So that's the mental model that has been there. So coming back to health, our goal with health is not the 100 million. So anybody who goes around and says, how will it help me? I use Practo, I have an insurance.
Right.
Well, this is all language and vocabulary of India 1. This is not the language and vocabulary of India 2. Right. So that's the purpose that we need to have. Now, we obviously need policy. We need, a commitment from the government. So there our model becomes that, look, we want to really help out there, but from your side, will you at least create a SPV? And in the case of health, they were kind enough to create NHA as a part of that discussion. It was National Health agency earlier, and then they upgraded that and made that National Health Authority.
Yeah.
So so that's a prerequisite. So to answer your question, since we are limited number of people, we have to be choosy about what we do. We have these two filters to help us decide, what we will pick up and what we will not pick up.
Okay, so I want to double click a bit on India 2 and India 3, right? Like you rightly mentioned, the reason they're not able to participate in the market, I would say one of the primary reasons is the propensity itself. Is the fact that they have limited amount of discretionary amount to spend. Now, if that is the case, all the technology and stack that we might be building, and again, don't get me as a pessimist, just thinking out loud. Anything that we might be building as vehicles or rails for either the government or startups and entrepreneurs to serve, for them to serve tier 2 and tier 3 India. Of course, you're making it easy for them to spend, but the primary problem was they do not have the money to spend. So in that case, how do you even create that market?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. So first of all, right, I mean, you don't even want this to be focused on discretionary spending.
Okay.
You want it to be focused on what they would regard as important. Discretionary spending is, look, I normally cook at home, but I'm doing better than before. So eating out is discretionary spending. Is that fair? Right?
Yeah.
Or ordering a pizza is discretionary spending, right? But spending on food at home is not discretionary spending. Right? Luckily in India, our culture is educating our kids is not discretionary spending.
Right.
Being able to husband our finances, right, in a much better way is not discretionary spending, right? Being able to participate with mutual funds in the economy, if you just go back 3 or 4 years, 5 years, or even less, the mutual fund participation in India was very, very small, right? So participating and getting for your very limited savings, but very valuable savings, and be able to get better kind of returns for that is important. I mean, in fact, it is more vital for a person who is able to save only a little than for a person who has enough savings. So our focus is not on discretionary spending. Now, ONDC is an exception, right? And therefore, ONDC is iSPIRT supported and is not iSPIRT. Our focus is more on financial inclusion, is making sure health is okay. Because if you are not you cannot participate in the financial services market, then you can't do anything at all, right? I mean, and so that is the fulcrum that has the biggest multiplier impact. And then why health? Because that's the quickest way to go from lower middle class back to India 3, right? You climbed your way into India 2, and if you want to go back to India 3, health is what takes you there, because our health system is frankly broken. I mean, it's broken in a way that we don't fully appreciate, right? And the third is that we need to be able to find a way of being able to fix logistics. So I'll spend a little bit of time, if you give me.
Yeah, sure, please. Yeah.
See, we don't appreciate that India has a problem which is now getting solved. The problem is that we have very competitive cement plants, steel plants, and even factories that produce soap and FMCG. But there is usually a 24 to 32% markup between the factory price and the street price. Because our distribution system is extraordinarily inefficient. Right? Now, what is happening is that distribution system is becoming more efficient. Take phones, for example. You go back 10 years, you would walk into a Sangeeta to buy this phone, and Sangeeta would get 18% of the value of the phone, and that would be spent in India, in leasing that place and paying local salaries and making flyers and shipping them around. Today, you're able to buy them online, right? And when you buy online, Flipkart or Amazon get maybe 1.2% for this, right? Now, the problem with that model is that 98 rupees are going to Korea if you bought a Samsung phone that evening.
Right?
And in the Sangeeta model, only 88 rupees were going. And so those 10 rupees extra that are going are actually weakening our economy, right? So if you don't now, this improvement in logistics, if you don't make sure that phone is being made in India, you've actually lost out. This is what's happening with AI. Let's say I order something from whatever, one of these e-commerce companies, Swiggy, and I have a dispute. Swiggy today will support me on chat, right? And let's say I'm picking numbers purposely. I don't want to give any confidential information away, but let's say that costs 14 rupees. That 14 rupees is being paid essentially to as salaries of the people who are doing customer support here.
Correct.
Now there are people who are able to do this with ChatGPT. They spend 7 rupees on ChatGPT and 2 rupees, because now the number of people you need is lower, you spend 2 rupees. So now they're very happy because from a company perspective, they brought 14 rupees to 9 rupees.
Yeah.
Right? So it's great for them, right? And consumer
but it's a decay for the economy.
But this is ruinous for the economy.
Yeah.
Because earlier those 14 rupees were spent locally. Now 14 has come down to 1/7. And by the way, 7 rupees, which is 50% of what you were spending, is going and making another country richer.
Right.
Right? So if we don't become a nation that actually produces the stuff that we consume, right? We don't become a nation which builds the models
that others would want to use.
That is going to serve this customer support use case, and that 7 rupees at least stays in India. And similarly, if we can't build phones here, then we cannot become a rich country by being a consumption economy. See, this is the big change that has taken place in the last 25 years, which our policymakers and our economists mostly don't get. See, in the past, if you had solar cells, you became a largest consumer of solar cells. 27.2% of the solar cell deployment, installation and everything was local. So that included sales, marketing, distribution, and installation. Now that is down to 6%, even for solar cells. So earlier, what was happening is that 70 rupees were going out, but roughly 30 rupees were staying here. Yeah. Now you have a situation where 94 rupees are going out and only 6 rupees. So no matter how big an economy you are of solar cells, you are making somebody else rich. You are not going to become rich on the back of just being a consuming economy. So this is a reality that we have to face as a country. We have to therefore become a producing economy. Right? And producing economy, not of no brand stuff, because that's not enough, for branded stuff, right? Even though that brand may be Intel and nobody sees, or maybe Nvidia and nobody sees, but it has to be something that you compete, because there are a handful of people, because at the same time, this is very often the winner take all part of it, right? And so the number of telecom equipment providers, are there only 4, hence they're called, who are Ericsson, Nokia, and Samsung. But there are 400 mobile operators. I mean, every country in the world has a mobile operator. But there are only 4 countries in the world that supply to those mobile operators. So we have to be in that circle of 4, circle of 5. If you're not in that circle of 4 or circle of 5, our country cannot be prosperous in the future. Just being a consuming economy is not going to be enough to make us prosperous as we go forward. So our third area is to do with all of this and logistics, and how to think about the fact that logistics is improving and what we are doing in data, how to then create a new type of a manufacturing economy that can focus on mass personalization. But that's something we have not publicly talked about a lot. We will do that in the coming years as we go forward.
Very interesting. But I completely understand and resonate with the fact that we need to at some point anchor to ourselves towards becoming a product or a production first nation. And if that is the case, I think this is an effort that is that requires heavy investment into capital expenditure, right? Things that you might just you might just need enough investment for you to get started in it. It's not that you just start out somewhere, unless you're coming up with an idea on a paper that's going to really be a new patentable tech that's going to change the world. And this is one of those, idea-driven approaches. As long as it's in the world of manufacturing or in any way just scaling operations, I think it's going to be capitally intensive. How do we tackle that?
It's a very good question, Krishna. But I think we are past that stage. So let me give you an example. You can relate to three $50 billion bets that are being made.
Yeah.
You can relate to the fact that Air India is making a $50+ billion bet to buy, all the planes that we know about, right?
Yeah.
Now, would that have been possible 10, 15 years ago? It would have been unlikely. You never saw a private company go out and make a $50 billion bet, right? This is because the economy has grown, many other good things have happened. So you have companies that are able to think of a $50 billion bet, right? In fact, it's probably more than 50 billion. I'm taking a conservative estimate here, right? The second big bet, which is also in the news, is in fact bigger than 50 billion. I think it's 120 billion, but it's a bet by Adani in physical infrastructure.
Yeah.
Now, whatever problems that we may have with that, the fact is that he's been able to mobilize capital to be able to make that bet, right? And he's not, from what we can see, he's probably not going out of business, right? So the fact is that, there's another private company that has mobilized a $50+ billion bet. Let me tell you the third, a $75 billion bet in green hydrogen and sodium ion by Reliance.
Yeah.
Right? Now, my view is that we have come to a point where we will be able to motivate $50+ billion bets. Right? And this is only going to improve, right, as we go forward. Now, the question is, what kind of bets do we make? So this makes me very unpopular.
Yeah. But I'm very curious to know your thoughts.
But I classify these three bets in two buckets.
Okay.
Safe bets and risky bets. So if I ask you to identify, there are two of these that are safe bets and one is risky bet. Which one will you call out as a risky bet out of these three that I told you?
Airline is a risky bet.
Okay.
Remaining, I would say,
because
safe.
Airline, as they say, if you're a billionaire, that's the quickest way to become
a millionaire.
Fair one. No,
but speaking seriously, I think the hydrogen bet is a risky bet.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
See, so I think we must spend a few minutes just understanding why, right?
Yeah.
See, when Jio was thinking about 4G, they had a hypothesis. And the hypothesis was that 4G data will cost 50% of 3G data.
Correct.
And when they built conviction around it, there was no proof of this anywhere in the world. Right? Luckily, that hypothesis turned out to be true. Right? And that made it a worthwhile kind of an investment. Are you with me so far?
Yes.
Right? Now, they are making a bet that where all internal combustion engines will go away, and they will be replaced by, let's say, cars. Instead of having a CNG tank in it, it will have a hydrogen tank.
Yeah.
And it may still have an internal combustion engine, but it may have a fuel cell instead, right? And on the back end, you may not need lithium-ion batteries, but you will need sodium-ion, right? Batteries. Now, if I ask people in the car industry that what are the odds that this is the vision that will be the reality, there's no consensus today that this is actually likely to happen. In fact, today, other companies that believe in something like this, like Toyota, are mocked by Tesla.
Yeah.
Hey, you're on the wrong path. You're not thinking right. Is that not true? Right.
Yeah.
So I think this willingness to make a bet on emerging technology, right, is the kind of bets that we need. It is that does not take away anything from the bet Chandra is making in Tata's, and if he ever listens to it, please don't beat me up. But it doesn't take away from your bet. But then the fundamental nature of the bet that you are making, that the Indian economy will grow, aviation sector will grow, they'll be able to have market share and and manage the fuel prices, is fundamentally a safer bet than the other one that we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So the question that comes up is, how many such bets will we make as a country, right? So let's, based on this discussion, agree on this non-linear bet, if we can give it that name, based on emerging technology, second criteria. Third, at a reasonable scale, may not be 75 billion, but at least should be 7.5 billion, right? Or 10 billion, something in that range, right? Now, the question is, as a country, how many such bets can we make, right? And where will these bets come from? And what does it take? What is the playbook for these bets to succeed? Right? What does it take? What heads need to be knocked together? Right? So that these bets can have an odds of success that's going to be high. Right? Now, this is what I think the lasting legacy of India Stack will be. Because India Stack was a bet. It didn't have money, but it had all these other considerations that we talked about. It was non-linear.
Yeah.
in nature. It's certainly ambitious in scale, right? I mean, population scale, right? It involved knocking heads together in a way that had never been done before, right? So what we are saying is that what the lasting legacy of India Stack is that this kind of playground building that we were able to practice in the last 10 years with India Stack is actually got applicability in many other bets that we're going to make, right? And that template is the template that has to be followed. In fact, a few years back, we kind of synthesized our effort around 6 more bets. So India Stack is one bet, which is unfinished, by the way. It will continue for some time to come. But there's 6 other bets. One of the most promising one that we've been quietly engaged in is actually to do with telecom equipment. How to add to hens. H will drop away because people don't want to buy Chinese stuff. So there is a place that is vacant. Can an Indian company take it? And this is the first time I'm saying it publicly. Yes, that is now almost sure that India will take that place. And it will be this company, beautiful company called Tejas Network. But that template that you have is come from what we did in India Stack, right? And we've been very quiet. That program is internally called Sarang. We created a consortium or helped create something called Voice Consortium. Government has played a stellar role. But most of all, this whole consortium, of which the leader is Tejas. Voice Consortium is headed by Tejas. 16 companies, all startups, including Tejas, have done extraordinary. When the full story is told a year or two later, will be one of the most inspirational stories of our country.
I'm sure, yeah.
And so the question is, can we now do that for orphan diseases? Right? Can we do that for defense? Can we do that for electronics? So let me tell you what is happening for electronics. I mean, these are stories don't make it because our media is not oriented on any of these, right? Our media wants to talk about India One startups. What is happening to Byju's? What is happening? Right? In the long run, that's not going to be relevant, right? So every LED bulb that you have has a SOC in it, right? So Ajit Chaudhary, who is the driver of this effort, went around and said, look, what if we build the SOC in India? What will be the specs of that, right? How much will it cost, right? So it turns out it'll be a 28 nanometer kind of a SOC that is there. He went to all the major LED manufacturers and he went there and he sat down and he said, look, if I give you this chip at this price, buy it. And many of them said yes. Then he's a smart guy. He knows that, remember, who is he? He is the co-founder, CEO and chairman of HCL, right? He's an accomplished person in his own right. And he's not doing this as HCL, by the way. He's doing it as a volunteer, right? To make that happen. And but in that power equation, that CEO sitting on the other side probably looks up to him as a CEO of what he had accomplished. So he knows that. So he says, look, I don't want this simple answer. I want a non-binding letter from you, right? But that letter must have board visibility, right? So now he has that letter. And so now you have this Indian ecosystem quietly producing this SOC. We don't know whether it'll succeed. It'll take us 3 years to know that. But the fact is, it is this kind of thinking that we are talking about. Non-linear, right? Scale of a type, bringing people together in a way they have never been brought together. That makes this possible. So what makes this possible is the Sutradhar. But for the Sutradhar to do this, they should believe that Ajay is not going to become richer on the back. He has to be able to tell them that I am not doing it for money, right? I don't even want the glory. I am doing it because this is my contribution to a better India, right? Then he has power in the system. When it appears that he is doing it for himself, as a billionaire, then he doesn't have a power in the system.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So that is the Sutradhar effect that you have. So now what in effect that is happening, just to finish that part, is that there is this new energy that is coming on these non-linear bets that we are talking about. These non-linear bets are what will make us a product nation. There is a template to make that happen. But anchoring the template are Sutradhars, like iSPIRT. iSPIRT pioneered that model, but instead of doing everything ourselves, we are creating many more iSPIRT. So, for example, this electronics one is an iSPIRT inspired entity called Epic Foundation that does that, as an example.
Very, very inspiring. Yeah, very inspiring, Sharad. I think this is very promising. And on a very lighter note, after all that you've mentioned, I think if this podcast goes live, Tejas networks will fly.
No, Sanjay Nayak, he is such an amazing guy. In early days of iSPIRT, I don't know, innumerable meetings that we had with him. I have a debt of gratitude to him. He's been, by the way, right from day one of the advisors of iSPIRT, right? And now they've completed 23 years of being a startup. It is very tempting along the way to lose heart. Right? There was no support from the local market, very little support from the local market. You've seen Huawei become a significant player you could lose heart, and you can try all these frivolous things, to find a way to move forward, to stay steadfast to your team. And most of in fact, all the founding team is intact. This is an important thing to say.
Definitely,
how many places you have the founding team intact today? The founder breakups are very common. The founding team. And amongst those first 30, 40 employees, most of them are still there. So they've been missionaries to a cause. And I'm so, so happy that missionary entrepreneur, who has been relegated to the sidelines in the favor of a mercenary entrepreneur, simply because we haven't even developed a vocabulary to distinguish.
Right.
Right. And the poor guy doesn't lose faith, doesn't become bitter, doesn't, lose bearings, and stays true to purpose. I think that requires something special, right? And now, in end of June, he is found another from Juniper. There's a new CEO coming in, and handing over the reins and having that person drive the next stage is also commendable. So this is an ode to Sanjay.
Definitely. Maybe someday I should also get him on the podcast, and I should. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, but another question I've been wanting to ask you, Sharad, is there's a lot of temptation among startups, particularly B2C ones, to really take an offering and make it available for extremely discounted prices, or in many cases even free to the audience, right? The most recent one I can count is Hotstar trying to say that the Test World Cup and some other matches are going to be airing free or streaming free for the audience. Now, although we might say that we build a product nation and there is a lot more stuff coming in, and although we might develop the propensity as the per capita income goes up and stuff like that, the moment we are a spoiled audience base or a user base that is very accustomed to free things, even when we have the propensity, will we ever end up paying for it? I think it becomes a very genuine question. And the reason I ask this is because to this date, we are not very comfortable with the idea of paying a delivery fee. Let's say it was Zomato, for instance, right? And in this scenario, when let's say an ONDC comes into picture and says, I'm going to remove the fees a lot more. And in all angles, it's a very good initiative, right? It's a very noble initiative where it makes the technology accessible to many more people. But are we, on some level, hurting our propensity in the coming days?
It's a very good question. So this takes us to two principles and a big idea, right? So let's talk about the principles. See, the first principle is, what's the role of an intermediate, right? So now the principle, why do we, many of these things are called open network, is for a reason.
Hmm.
The open network principle is a principle about the role of the intermediary. The role of the intermediary is, if it is the buyer's agent, the open network principle says that it's okay if the intermediary is a buyer's agent or a seller's agent. The moment it becomes an agent of both, it is very hard to regulate it. Right? And you can relate to that. So let's take a simple example, mutual funds.
Right.
I can buy a mutual fund from a seller's agent who claims to offer me the best fund, which is good for me, but actually doing it based on distribution fee that they're going to get, right?
Right.
Isn't it? So you have another type of agent, which is RIA, Registered Investment Advisor, and who is, I am paying for him. He's my agent, right? He doesn't get a distribution fee. Now, if so this is something Mr. UK Sinha, when he was the SEBI chairman, he did that. And so what he did was, he said, look, I'm okay. You can be either. You can let the customer decide which agent they want to go to, right? But the moment you have an agent that can take money from both sides, then it becomes very difficult to regulate. Because today it's very easy to regulate. The mutual fund complains against the broker.
It's different from that of a...
And you can say, did you screw? Your answer is yes, you can regulate. Similarly, on the buyer side, hey, you're buyer's agent and you didn't do something which was in the favor of the buyer. It's very easy to regulate. The moment that person is in the middle, it's very difficult to regulate. Right? Are you with me so far?
100%.
So the first is that in India can be built about open networks. I don't know whether you know, how did this idea take root, or this principle become clear to us? It became clear to us in 2014, 2015 because of Free Basics. Remember Free Basics?
Yeah.
Free Basics was a Facebook program that came to India after succeeding in 26 other countries. And, they said, look, we need a new type of a ISP that we're going to call Free Basics, right? What is the ISP? That net neutrality principle, which is a subsidiary principle of open networks, essentially says ISP is nothing but an intermediary. Intermediary between, let's say, YouTube, which is giving you the content, and you who is consumer. Right? So it can be either your agent or YouTube's agent. It can't be both persons' agent. And then they thought hard about it and says, whose agent should it be allowed to? They said it can only be your agent and not the content provider's agent. Are you with me so far? And then Facebook said, hey, this is a great principle for rich countries because consumers can spend money. India, you cannot spend money. So what if we allow us to set up a new type of ISP where the content providers, it will be the agent of the content providers. And, and therefore it will be free to the consumers, right? And therefore called Free Basics, right? On paper, this looks great, right? But it's not great. And many people in the ecosystem at that time came together. Kiran of HasGeek, played a seminal role in this. Nikhil Pava played a role. iSPIRT was very actively involved. And a movement came, which is called Save the Internet. And that was able to put pressure and get clarity on this net neutrality principle. Now, although this then went away, after that, luckily for us, in SEBI, they decided to try this out, the open network principle with the mutual fund. And it's been very successful.
Okay.
Right? Now, I don't know, in e-commerce, this was tried out with GEM. And it's been very successful. Right? That if you're an intermediary, if GEM is an intermediary between buyer and the seller, whose agent is it? Is it a buyer's agent or is it a seller's agent? Or is it both people's agent? Right? And similarly, the most controversial, but no longer controversial, but at that time, is our OTA market. Our online travel agent market is different from many other countries. So when you buy a ticket from Make My Trip, you pay a convenience fee, don't you? They get nothing from the airline. Because they are passenger's agent. Left to themselves, wouldn't they have loved it if they could collect fee from both sides?
Both sides, definitely.
Right?
But in a way, so you're basically telling that restricting or forcing people to either choose to be a buyer's agent or a seller's agent allows to create more players.
Allows you to create more players and have more regulated environments. So it allows for better regulation, especially. And now why this is important is because the problem that is coming up is that the moment that you do have these rogue intermediaries, it is impossible to regulate them. So what has happened is, I could argue that essentially, Facebook, Google and all they are agents of both sides.
Mm. Mm.
And even the Western regulation system is not being able to regulate them.
Mm.
Even forget routine daily regulation. Not only are they not able to wrap their minds on how to do that, they're not
Yeah.
able to even figure out how antitrust will work.
Mm.
Right? Because see, for regulation, you need an organizing principle.
Correct.
It has to be very clear. Now,
Right.
the organizing principle was, will it hurt the consumer? But the moment you made something free, it became almost impossible to figure out for a long while. Now,
Right.
of course, understanding has developed. A change in antitrust is happening. Leena Khan,
Yeah.
as a 34-year-old has been appointed there. And, Europe is taking cudgels on behalf of that. But fundamentally, regulating a person who is both sides agent is going to be very wrong. Now, if you live in the US, everybody knows that if you buy a property, that agent will come you and ask you to sign a form saying that I am your buyer's agent and I will not represent the same property as a seller's agent. So they
Mm.
created a very simple system called MLS to allow for this to happen. This has been there since 1958.
Mm.
This has nothing to do even about technology. Right?
Yeah,
So first,
100%.
if
Yeah.
we frame this problem in terms of these two principles, one is open network principle, which is what the role of the intermediary. Second is to be able to regulate.
Mm.
Once you have clearer roles defined, to be able to regulate, being able to use techno-legal regulation.
Mm.
Techno-legal regulation is another word for real-time regulation.
Mm.
Right? Because if I'm going to be giving out loans online, and then I only go back and look at the loan portfolio a year from now, a lot of damage would have happened.
Mm.
Right? I should be able to look at it on a week by week, perhaps day by day basis as a regulator.
Mm.
Right? So,
Right.
so two principles that are important is that we must need real-time regulation, and the ecosystem should be set up not to have rogue intermediaries. Are you with me?
100%. Yeah.
Now, in the absence of this, what tends to happen is that you become the product. Essentially, whenever something is being given out
Correct.
free,
Yeah.
there is some types of free which are absolutely okay to do. PayPal back in time. I remember I signed up for PayPal. When I signed up for PayPal, I got $15 for signing up, which was a lot of money at that time.
Yeah.
I'm not joking, right? And then they reduced it to, I think, $12 and finally $1 and $2. And by the time they got 60 million users, right, by this method of bribing people, essentially, they
Yeah.
managed to get 60 million people, and they
By
were now
shelling $1 billion.
profitable, and they could now stop doing that. This is where all this freebie model comes from. When SaaS does a freemium model, say, hey, you can try my product for free for a month, 2 months, or forever. And if you really like it, then you can become a power user and pay for it. There's nothing wrong in it.
Yeah.
Because there is no rogue intermediary in that setup.
Right.
And regulating that is very, very easy. So what has happened is that we've created these commerce models, which have violated this principle. And to solve them, this is not a protocol play, right? In fact, OTA running as an open network in India has a proprietary protocol. So whether it's an open protocol or proprietary protocol, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Yes.
GEM is not an open protocol. It doesn't use OCEN, right? So it's not. It doesn't use ONDC. So it's not a protocol is not the issue. It's the regulatory setup of this that is actually the issue that we have. So if the goal of Hotstar is to be like PayPal, then it's okay. If it is to be like an advertising, what I think Ethan Zuckerberg calls the original sin of the internet, right? Then there is a different problem, right? Do you know why the internet original sin happened?
I'm curious now.
Have you encountered a 404 error?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. But there is similarly a 402 error.
Okay.
Which you've never encountered.
Yeah.
Micropayment failed.
Okay.
So the original conceptual model of web built by people like in the W3C movement, Tim Berners-Lee and others, was that you will pay for content, or the person may choose to give it free. And if you pay for the content, it will be through a micropayment. Right? Now, what happened for a variety of reasons that micropayment systems never came up? Now, there's a small group of people, I'm not one of them, who believe that this was instigated by the payment players of that time. But I don't think there's enough evidence to show that was the case. And so because there was no possibility of micropayment, right? And yet I, as a content provider, wish to be paid.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So the alternative to that was the advertising model. And that's called the original SIL. So in that, you became the product, or the consumer became the product because, they were getting it free. But the other kind of free, which is the PayPal free or the SaaS free, I think is most of the time okay. It still means that somebody who has capital has an edge, but that's a different problem. I don't know whether the regulator needs to regulate that at all.
It's interesting that you would mention the example of, that where originally it was conceived to allow for micropayments. And I think at the core, the product that I'm particularly building is all about bringing back the micropayments in the world of content again. But I want to, again, address back the issue of credit, right? Because multiple people that I've spoken to, the one problem that really stands out is it's just 1 out of 6 people in India that get access to credit. What about the remaining 5 to 6? And like you mentioned, one way to offer credit is to the MSMEs. But at the core, I think one thing we need to acknowledge is the moment we offer credit to MSMEs, all we are trying to do is allowing them to, putting them in a position where they can serve the customers better. But again, tying back to the original discussion where we had, where we said that most people do not have enough propensity to participate in the market. Do you think increasing access to credit for, let's say, education or for activities that will allow for increased propensity is going to be much more meaningful?
So there are 2 types of credit, right? One is called consumption credit and the second is business credit, right? Consumption credit is that based on my ability to pay for consumption, since that is limited, I can pull forward future consumption into the present.
Correct.
Right? So I don't have enough savings to buy a scooter, but I can pull forward the future savings to buy a scooter, right? And this is, of course, this may improve my odds to earn a living, but there could be other types of consumption which may not do any of that at all, right? Say buy a white coat or something like that, right? The second is a business credit where I'm much more disciplined, and if I do manage to get this credit, it has a impact on my ability to, on my business ability. I can do more business as a result, right? Now, so if we agree with these 2 definitions, I think where RBI stands, RBI is relatively cold on the first type of credit, right? Having a lot of consumer debt, right? Consumable debt is not something they feel is necessary or helpful in the long run, right? Because we will be capital starved. If left to themselves, their desire is that this capital that we have, the credit capital that we have, should go to wherever there is a business, there is an impact. In an individual, it could be education loan because it will improve my odds to be able to do something. But it is something that is linked with future capacity, right? To be able to generate income or be able to do a business, right? So this is first distinction. So all this revolution that we are talking about, BNPL particularly, is not in the long run actually going to do anything to Indian economy, because all that it does is it pulls forward the future to the present, right? But if all this money that is used for BNPL is instead put in small businesses or even education loans for that matter, then what happens is then the economy's ability to consume grows up. BNPL does not change in any way, the fundamental ability of the economy to consume, right? It only brings forward by a few quarters or a year, what that consumption may be. But if you do it in the second category, then the ability to consume of the potential of the economy to consume is actually going to go up. So first, we must make a distinction between these 2 types of things. Now, this is true for everything else, right? AI is going to make augmentation easy It can make me a better teacher, better student, better chess player.
Yeah.
It'll also improve my ability to distract myself with better games,
Yeah.
better pornography and better, all the distraction engines will also become better, right?
Right.
And so augmentation will become better, distraction will become better. Similarly, all credit is not equal. There is one type of credit that is better for the economy in the long run than the other. So that distinction is very important. So then the question becomes, how do you take the better credit and make it available to people who are not able to have it today? So there is a central idea, which is to do with tenor. So I'm going to play this game with you, right? I am 59 years old. You are my medical insurer.
Okay.
I come to you and say, look, I don't have medical insurance. I'm generally healthy. Will you give me a 1-year insurance? So you say, Sharad, I don't know, but go and get a medical test done. So I go and medical test done. You look at it and you say, sure, I give you 1-year insurance for pick a number. It doesn't matter what number for this discussion, but let's say for 5,000 rupees.
Okay.
Right. So I say, great. Thank you. Mr. Insurer, I appreciate this. But you know what? I'm going to need it for the next 10 years. So instead of giving you 5,000 rupees now, here is it. I'm giving you 50,000 rupees. I am paying for my remaining 9 years insurance, prepaying it for now. Just give me a 10-year policy. Will you give it to me?
I think I will, because there's more value I can derive out of the prepaid amount.
All right. The real answer is you won't.
Okay.
Because if I was 21 years old, you would give it, because your mental calculation will be, what are the chances that he'll really fall sick in his 20s? Very, very low.
Yeah.
What are the chances he'll fall sick in his 60s? Man, pretty high. Right? So what you will come back and tell me is that, look, Sharad, I'm happy to sell you an insurance every year. Right? But I can't promise what that premium will be. If you remain healthy, your premium will grow only slightly. Right? Right? But for example, if you don't keep yourself healthy, then your premium will shoot up. And so how can I lock in your premium for the next 9 years now, right? At age 59. Are you with me so far?
Yeah.
Right? But instead, if I was a 21-year-old, you'll agree
upfront
to do that. And if I instead came to you and said, hey, I got to do a quick trip to Singapore, I need insurance only for 2 days, will you give it to me? You'll give it to me without a medical test, because he said, what can go wrong in 2 days? Right?
Yeah, it's all about hedging the bet.
It is all about hedging. It's all about predictability and knowing what will happen. Predictability that I'll stay healthy at 21 is high. Predictability that I'll stay healthy for 10 years at 59 is low. Predictability that I'll stay at 59 healthy for 2 days is very high, right? So it's all about predictability, right? So now remember, the people who are unserved in India are people who don't have long-term predictability. Right? So we can solve this problem by we may not be able to look at a MSME and say so today is 10th of June, we're recording this on that day. And so we may not be able to predict what they will be doing in June 2024, right?
Correct.
Will they be up by 10%, 20%, down by 10%, 20%? We may not know that. But, we reasonably, given that we have all this GST data, we have the bank account data, we can look at high provenance data about their business now. We can predict reasonably well what they will be doing next month, perhaps next quarter. Are you with me so far?
Yeah.
Right? So if I can predict their next month and next quarter, why not give them a loan based only on that?
Short-term loans. Yeah.
It's a short-term loan, tenor loan. And you know what? So so I'll give you an example. Supposing I was a lender, and I'm not, but I'm just illustrating this, and I put a sign there, I will give a loan to anybody and everybody that walks in. And let's say a beggar walks in, right? I can still give him a 1-day loan of 200 rupees. Then he comes back next day. He takes the loan in the morning, retires it in the evening, comes back next day. I give him another loan of 200 rupees and I do it for 30 days. Then I say, man, I now understand. And I know you have a propensity to pay. I'm willing to give you, don't need to come every day. I'll give it to you for 100 rupees for a week. Come back every Saturday, right? Or come back over time every month. So you can migrate people, provided you have this mental model that you're giving a custom loan. You are giving a custom loan based on what is the level of predictability that you have about that borrower. And what that may mean is that in the custom loan, you're deciding what the tenor will be and what the amount will be. And if the tenor is as low as 1 day, right? And as low as 100 rupees. So in the pilot for OCEN that we did with Gem Sahe, I think the smallest loan that was given was 128 rupees. And then, when we spoke to the lender, an NBFC, he said, no, it's okay because I can tell you how I'll still make 2 rupees on this loan.
Wow. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So to make this system come to life, right, you need to bring a new, the analog that I give, and you'll probably agree when your viewers will agree with me. Had there been no prepaid, do you think we would have mobile phone penetration that we have today?
No. Prepaid. No, I would disagree. I don't think it's got to do with prepaid. I think at some point the penetration was largely driven by, I would say, Jio making internet or calls free for a certain duration.
Now, the penetration, Jio made data penetration happen.
Yeah.
But the phone penetration had already happened before that.
But
right?
What did it have to do with prepaid?
Because, if you remember, Reliance, Arcom suffered in the beginning. Because if it's postpaid, then you got to go and collect. You don't know whether that person is going to pay. Right? So what happens in the prepaid model is that you get, and why all developing countries prepaid still dominates, 70, 80% of the overall business for a variety of reasons. Because it allows a person who has got limited money to manage his budget. If he does postpaid, he doesn't know how much he'll end up spending, right? And in prepaid, what happens? They know it. I'm buying a 168 rupee pack, and that's all that I'll spend this this month, and I'll keep track of it somehow or the other. And you don't have to go back and collect the money because the collection costs are very, very high. So everywhere in the world, the actual mobile penetration took off because the prepaid was conceived. A new way of selling a mobile phone, right, compared to the old model. So here, you need a new type of a loan product to do the penetration of the market that you're talking about. But that loan product becomes viable because certain conditions are being met. One condition is that the cost of issuing a 168 rupee loan is in a couple of rupees. Because if it was 50 rupees, do you think it will be viable?
No.
If you have to pay 50 rupees for a paper KYC of the person who's going to get a 168 rupee loan, it's not viable.
It's not viable, yeah.
Right? So the whole process of being able to get an application, be able to adjudicate an application, sign a loan and disperse the money should be in a couple of rupees. Then only can it become viable.
Right.
And then if you have to rotate it should be even lower because you don't have to do KYC at this point in time, right? And so that is one requirement. Second, to be able to predict at least the near future, you should have some data that becomes available. What is that data? Can I see how you're doing? What's your bank account saying? Right? If your future business, what is it looking like based on the invoices outstanding? Can I look at the outstanding invoices that you have on GST? Because that will give me an idea what it is going to be, right? Even this basic data allows you to predict the business in the short term as you go forward. And the third, of course, is that the regulator has to be also very agile because these are all unsecured loans, right?
Right.
And so for that agility, they have to be able to do real-time regulation. So really thinking of this problem in a holistic way and then building everything that you need, including the dashboards that the regulator needs to regulate, right, is what will allow this system to come to life. So it's a slow process, right? So we've had this idea for some time, right? And the RBI then set up a committee under UK Sinha called the UK Sinha MSME Committee that gave a report in June. And they agreed with that idea. And then we were able to launch in June 2019. And then 2020, we were able to actually launch essentially OCEN.
Okay.
But it took much, much longer to get settled in. And A, is now got momentum and is growing well. And without account aggregator, without the data being available, this would not take off, right? So rather than prematurely launching it and then it not actually finding traction, we decided to wait till the data ecosystem gets ready, which is now happening. So again, in the next few weeks, you will see a major. So we ended up doing a pilot with GEM, right? Because that allowed us to still learn about how this works. And based on the learning, we'll be able to do now a big launch sometime in the coming weeks, perhaps less than a month away from now.
Oh, wonderful.
So watch out for that.
Very interesting. So I understand the premise is basically a good entry point to build the distribution would be to basically organize unorganized credit today.
Exactly. And the way to do that is, see, in addition to operating costs that I talked to you about, in addition to capital cost, which is the cost of capital, the biggest cost that you have is the cost of acquisition.
Correct.
Right? So the question that becomes is, can we find a way to be able to, so let's say I'm a bank, right? I have, and let's say the operating cost, which is the cost of processing a loan, is same for everybody because that's a common system that everybody is using. But let's say I'm a bank, I have low cost of capital, but then to find all the restaurants, I'll have high cost of acquisition, right? But if I'm a Swiggy or a Zomato, I have low cost of acquisition because they are already my customers, right? I'm a black bag or a porter, right? I have low cost of acquisition, right? But if I set up my own NBFC, I'll have very high cost of capital.
Right.
So what if you build a system where the person who has low cost of acquisition can easily collaborate with the person who has low cost of capital and together partner to offer credit to that customer, right? That system is what is OCEN about. So therefore, our loans that have been given in GEM are in low teens, which is extraordinary, right? Because why is it extraordinary? Because that's a low number. You can't get a low teens loan for a small business from the bank at all. It's very, very difficult to do that. Here, you're literally able to get it in minutes, right? And so why is that the case? Not because somebody's generosity is at work, is because GEM already, as a borrower's agent, has low cost of acquisition. And all the lenders that are coming in generally have low cost of capital. And the system has low transaction costs. So when you combine all the three, then automatically you are able to serve people at a price point that makes it affordable for them.
And now that I extrapolate this, I think on some level, the account aggregation model also allows to reduce the cost of acquisition.
Absolutely. Because, there's no doubt about that. And So this is really what is driving that.
So Sharad, there is a question I ask everyone on my podcast. If you were a 23-year-old today, freshly out of college, what would you do? And particularly in India.
It's a very good question. I feel so there's a beautiful book called The Sports Gene. And, he asks a question in that book. He says, has human evolution taken place? Because if you look at sports as we know today, right? And if you look at individual sports, track and field, athletics, so on and so forth, you would find that there's been tremendous improvement. We can run faster, we can cycle further, and the human performance has exploded, right? And so is there human evolution taking place in the last 30-40 years? And of course the answer to that is no, right? So how is it that we are seeing this tremendous improvement in human performance, right? We can run, at not very long ago, only in the 50s, we could run a 4-minute mile. Now, people are able to run it so much faster than that. And you understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So the answer, and he postulates this question and then finally gives three answers. One of the most important one is that, look, every sport has a body type. So, for example, if you play basketball, it benefits, the tall players have a benefit, right? If you swim, another type of tallness matters, right? In the basketball, your limbs should be long. And if you want to be a good swimmer, then you want to have for others, then your torso has to be very, very long. And you can almost imagine that there's a body type for every sport. And he shows that in the last 30 years, how sports and the body type has become a better and better match with each other. Right? Now, this, of course, used to be done in East Germany and North Korea and others by force, because they would take young children, because the body type of a person is almost fixed by 6-7 years of age. And they would use that to, put them in sports.
Design the body.
For them or not. But now that's actually done by choice, right? I mean, the systems gently steers you in the direction where you have a natural advantage because of your body type. Are you with me so far?
Yeah.
Right? I think that that metaphor also applies to life in general. And let me explain why. We know now from the work that has taken place in psychology that there are some parts of us that are not malleable, right? For example, our weight is malleable. I love to lose some weight. But height is not malleable, right? But similarly, in our human stack, our emotions are obviously very malleable, right? Our fears are also malleable, not at the same way our emotions, but we can deal with our deep fears, and we should, and then our belief systems are malleable. People who may believe in one political ideology may sometimes shift to another one. Most of them don't, but some of them do. And it happens, but it takes 4 or 5 years for that to take place, and so on and so forth. But there is some part of it that is not malleable, and that they have given the official name of personality. These are the human traits. And they looked at 60 traits. They said which were the least malleable, and they picked 10 of them, and they grouped them into 5 categories. They called them Big 5, right? This is a form of self-knowledge. Now, depending on what your personality traits are, right? This is something you should accept about yourself, just the way you have to accept your height, right? And if you have to accept about yourself, and then find a way to add value to society so that you are doing something that plays to your strength, right? Now, getting that match, personality and habitat match, is, I think, the most important thing in human society now. Why is this the case? Because in the old model, whether you have a match or not, whether you have any desire or you're suited because of your personality to be a builder or an engineer, but it's cool to be an engineer. My parents are wanting me to be an engineer. Let me go and become an engineer. That's a good enough thing to do, because, I'll be not a great engineer, but I'll be a good enough engineer. And it's okay. Today, there is no premium on being just good enough in anything that you do. You have to find your own area where you can be great at what you do. Right? So your time in your early 20s has to be devoted to figuring that out. Right? And I think parents, friends, well-wishers have a lot of role to play. In my case, my uncle, my father's younger brother, my chacha, played a role. And so I knew I needed to be a builder. What kind of a builder, it didn't matter. And then I stumbled into Unix kernel, and one thing led to another. But the fact is that what I'm trying to do fits with my own personality, right? And that allows me to have fun with what I'm doing. It allows me to grow, maybe allows me to be good at what I do, right? And so the goal, I think, is to find that match as we go, right? And that is obvious. It's not so obvious, but the tools that are available to young people now, which is to be able to do a Big 5 kind of a understanding of your own personality, are better than ever before. So you got to be. So there's no place for a recreational sports person anymore. Everybody has to be a professional sports person. We are living in a world where everybody has got to be really good at what they do, right? And to earn a living, Otherwise, you will be on universal basic income, right? There will be only two options that will be there. So if you don't want to be on universal basic income, then you better be good at what you do. To be good at what you do, you must have self-knowledge and be able to figure out, based on your personality, what will suit you. That often requires experiments. And your early 20s should be devoted to figuring that personality habitat match. Because if you can get, then your rest of your life will be fun.
So would you rephrase it and say that figuring out the personality habitat match is all about figuring out what your core strengths are, and mostly not necessarily hard skills, but soft skills?
In fact, there's a beautiful book by Martin Seligman. He's the father of positive psychology. Now in his 80s. I hope he's still alive. I don't know that for sure. He's written many books, but my favorite book is a relatively thin book called Authentic Happiness. You may just have it behind me somewhere.
Yeah, but that's a big library. Yeah.
So, but what he says is very simple. He says, we all know material happiness, buying a new car, scooter, or something is not going to make a difference. But the second is, if you have 4 hours of being in the zone, being engaged, in a week, can you make it 14 hours a week? You'll be much happier if you do that. Right? So he says his basic hypothesis is that means playing to your strengths. You can never make 4 hours, 14 hours if you are playing to weaknesses, right? So he includes in the book, this VIA strength finder. He says this is not really good. You can find better ones. But just to make my point, I'm giving you one for free so that you can start off by seeing what this is about. But he then goes on to say that even though you may have engaged happiness, that is not enough, because there is a human need to be part of something larger than yourself. Right? So therefore, be part of a mission that is bigger than you. So in iSPIRT, for us, building Product Nation is bigger than all of us, right? We have to work together. We are all servants to that mission, right? Or doesn't it sound somewhat religious? It is, because that is how you find meaning. And this is what missionary entrepreneurs do. Missionary entrepreneurs make their mission or company's mission so important, and they make their company a servant to that larger mission. So even in entrepreneurship, if you want to be an entrepreneur, be a missionary entrepreneur. You will be happier than a mercenary entrepreneur. And as Paul Graham says, you'll be even more successful because, he's written a beautiful essay on
you're
this.
obsessed about a particular
because
thing.
You are willing to take a long-term decision. You're willing to carry the ecosystem with you. So it will make you richer also in the long run, right?
Yeah.
And so my hope is that, we can think in those terms as we go forward. But the unchanging part of this is still your self-knowledge. And self-knowledge is at a premium. It wasn't at that premium 10, 15, 20 years ago. It will be one of the most important things that we'll have to worry about in the AI-led future that we are talking about.
And my last question, Sharad, if Sharad were to if you were to start out today as an entrepreneur, building your own venture, what would the venture be?
Right. I think I have this fascination right now with what I call as white models versus dark models, right?
Okay.
I think, when we have cars, when we have food, there are safe cars, there are unsafe cars, right? There is safe food, there is unsafe food. Now we're going to enter an era where there'll be good models or safe models, and there'll be unsafe models, right? Just to
clarify, by models, you mean business models?
No, I'm talking about AI models.
AI models, okay.
Yeah, right. So in AI models, just the way you can't look at food very often, processed food, and say, is it safe or not safe? You have to go to the lineage of it and see how it was produced. You can't look at a car and just know whether it's safe or not. You have to do a test to know whether it's a safe car or not. You'll have to do both of this will apply to models as well. Right. So I think over time, the market will cleave between these two types of models that we are talking about, safe and unsafe, dark and white. We can give them various type of labels. And I think, there is a good opportunity, for people to start off who focus very early on these kind of models that have the right orientation in them, right? and it's not too late to do that, even for foundation models. And so that would be an area to focus on. And I think that based on what is going to be launched in the coming months, the second half of DEPA, you remember account aggregator has always been called the DEPA inference cycle.
Yeah.
And there's always been a training cycle. That training cycle is going to come later this year. And India will have a special environment, a special playground to be able to build models. And my hope is that, we have many people in India who choose to build these white models. And eventually, India is seen as the world capital, the hub for white models in the world, right? I mean, and so we become a model-making country, AI model-making country, which we will, if we have the right, ecosystem to allow that to happen. And then we choose to build a set of models that would stand out, so that people, just the way we think of Japanese car and we know intuitively that they are reliable cars, just the way we think of, German machines and we know that they're well engineered. We think of Italian consumer things and we associate them with design. My desire, my passion is that can India be associated with ethical, safe, and humanistic models. And
so build the Sony of AI models.
People choose to use Indian models for that reason.
Yeah, very interesting. This has been a very engaging and thorough, I would say, 2-hour conversation. Sharad, thanks a lot for sharing all your thoughts, insights, perspectives. Definitely a lot of insightful stuff, a lot of inspiring stuff.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for being on my podcast.